These are the final words from a lone apocalyptist. No need to heed the words as the events have already taken place. These words are to explain to you and all that may hear them, about how the current events came to be. There is a silver lining to these words, but you must stay tuned for them to reveal themselves. A word from the Apocalyptist. April 4, 1994. Vanessa rose. She felt completely fine as she has every other morning. She thought to herself that since they made such a big deal out of it, she would wake with spider sense or some superpower, or even be physically changed or deformed. Abbas no, she was still plain old Vanessa, a boring lab tech assistant. Vanessa performed her morning routine as normal, with one exception: she was sad because she couldn't touch or kiss her husband and daughter goodbye for the day. She went off to work again, and yet again another Groundhog's Day. Even her rounds felt routine. As she approached Fred's cage, she heard loud noises with lots of banging. As she rounded the corner of the cage and saw what appeared to be an 8-year-old monkey but had on Fred's collar and ear tag. The harder she looked, the more and more he started to resemble Fred, but 20 years younger. She called over one of the lab techs and asked who was in Fred's cage and where Fred was taken to. As the lab tech arrived, they both looked in amazement and started ruffling through paperwork. There was nothing saying the monkeys have been moved or even touched since yesterday. Vanessa called over a veterinarian to check on young Fred. He brought young Fred to the office. He still had his patient tattoo saying he was Fred. The DR did a full checkup and blood workup. Vanessa headed back to her desk, worried what the DR would find, since it was her fault. She sat around awaiting the results. As it neared 5 o'clock in the evening, she got frustrated and figured she would go to the DR. There hung a sign saying out to lunch back at 13:30. She was so pissed. She stormed down the hallway towards Lab 2, just knowing the doctor probably skipped out of work for the rest of the day. As she reached Lab 2, she saw Fred sitting in his cage playing and eating. She stood stunned for a moment. She still couldn't get over how he looked and acted 20 years younger. She proceeded back to her desk to wrap up work and headed home for the evening. At dinner, she explained her day to Bob while she was feeding her daughter. They tried watching TV for a bit, but she was still too worried for Fred to focus on the show. April 5, 1994. Vanessa woke up as normal, felt like she was back in the same old routine, but this time her thoughts were on the results of Fred's workup. She hurried through her morning routine, then rushed off to work in such a panic that she didn't pay attention to her car engine lights, then ran out of gas. She called AAA. They said they can be there in about an hour. So as she sat and waited, cursing herself for being forgetful, she still worried about Fred. The one day she wanted to be into work early, she sat down on the hood of her car and waited. AAA showed up after about 30 minutes, helped her with her car and got her on her way. As she sped off from the side of the road, this time in even more of a hurry, she failed to see the car next to her, which she caused to swerve, which then drew the attention of the radar cop down on the median of the road, which then flipped his lights on and followed behind her till Vanessa pulled over. She freaked out and yelled at herself that it was a horrible day already. As the cop tapped on the glass and asked for license and registration, she gathered all the paperwork and handed it to the officer. He disappeared to his car and was gone for about 15 minutes. He returned with her information and he asked, "What's the hurry since you have a perfect driving record?" All she could say was late for work. He handed her stuff back and said to slow down and that this was a warning. She realized that being a little late for work is cheaper than a ticket. As she pulled off, she obeyed the traffic laws on her way to work. As Vanessa rounded the corner to her work, she could see all the people standing outside around the building, which was also blocked by about 40 black SUVs. She parked her car, climbed out and started to walk to some of her close co-workers. As someone called out her name, just then she was grabbed, lifted off the ground and brought into the building by 4 big men. They rushed her into an office. She was told to sit in a chair as they pointed across the room. She screamed, fought, and kept asking questions like, "Where are we going? Who are you? What's going on?" They just kept quiet and didn't say a word. Finally, Dr. Jacob Green walked into the office and sat in the main chair. He excused the men for their roughness towards Vanessa and then asked them to step outside. Once the door closed behind them, Jacob turned and rose from his chair and walked over and locked the door and turned on some music on the radio.